In a small, snow-covered town, the world moves in gentle, slow motion. Soft flakes drift from a quiet sky. Fires glow warmly behind frosted windows, and every sound is hushed. Here, winter is peaceful, unhurried and soothing, a perfect place to rest and drift into calm.
The town did not wake with alarm, but with a soft and gentle hush, as if the world had been wrapped in a blanket of silence. Overnight, the first snow of winter had drifted down from quiet clouds, settling on rooftops, chimneys, and garden fences. The streets were untouched, no footprints, no wheels, only smooth blankets of pale white. A soft glow from street lamps revealed the tiniest glitter where flakes caught the light. The air held the crisp smell of winter, clean, empty, peaceful. Windows were still dim, curtains still drawn, but inside every home the season had already begun to whisper its arrival. Outside, snow continued to fall, slow and steady, each flake taking its own time to reach the earth. Nothing hurried, nothing pushed. The town, barely awake, simply breathed in the quiet and let itself rest beneath the gentle stillness of snow.
Morning came slowly, without urgency, as though the sun itself was still wrapped beneath the comforter of clouds. One by one, curtains shifted, and lamps flickered to life behind frosted windows. The town remained peaceful, the silence undisturbed, until the sound of soft boots pressed into the snow. A baker, bundled in a thick wool coat, stepped out of her small stone home. Her footsteps made the faintest crunch, each one leaving behind a small, perfect imprint. She did not hurry. The path to her shop was short, and the stillness of the morning was too gentle to disturb with haste. As she walked, her breath drifted in pale puffs before vanishing into the cold air. Doors remained closed, chimneys just beginning to wake. It was a world of white, quiet, and unbroken calm, and with every slow, measured step, the town began its day in the tender hush of falling snow.
The morning unfolded at a pace the world rarely allows anymore. Slow, unhurried, and content simply to exist. The snow continued its gentle descent, flakes drifting like tiny feathers, each one finding its place among the countless others blanketing the cobblestone streets. Shops began to stir, though not all at once. A lantern flickered to life in the bookshop window, its warm glow spreading outward, casting a soft invitation into the still, snowy air. Inside, the elderly shopkeeper moved with the same tranquil slowness as the snow outside. She dusted a shelf, straightened a row of worn bindings, and paused to listen to the muffled quiet, as if savoring the privilege of silence. Across the street, the postman unlocked his small office, brushing snow from his cap before stepping inside. He lit a wood stove, and the room filled with the rich scent of burning pine. The crackle of the first flames broke the morning hush, but in a way that comforted rather than disturbed. A sound like warmth awakening. The town clock chimed just once, its voice softened by the winter air. The single note drifted lazily between the buildings, echoing without urgency, telling time but asking nothing of it. Outside, a few early risers crossed the streets, their boots tracing new paths through untouched drifts. They nodded to one another with small smiles, no words needed, for the shared experience of winter morning spoke loudly enough. Even the birds honored the pace of the day. Instead of their usual flurry of chatter, they perched quietly on branches weighed down by snow, their feathers puffed against the cold. A single chirp now and then seemed almost a gentle reminder that the world was still awake beneath the stillness. Farther down the lane, a young couple stepped outside their quaint house, wrapped in thick scarves and holding steaming mugs. They stood on their porch, sipping slowly, watching the snow fall without speaking. The warmth of the cups kissed their hands, while the snow kissed the world. It was a moment without demands, just breathing, watching, being. The entire town, in its own small, graceful ways, settled into the morning. No rushing engines, no hurried footsteps, just the steady whisper of winter, the soft punctuation of cracking wood, and the gentle rhythm of a community waking not to tasks or responsibilities, but to the gift of stillness itself.
The café at the corner of Maple Street was the last to open, not out of laziness, but tradition. Its owner, a quiet man with silver hair and kind eyes, believed that morning should not be rushed. Inside, he moved slowly beneath dim lights, lighting a few candles on the windowsills before turning on the lamps. Their warm glow softened the edges of the room, filling it with a gentle amber hue that contrasted the world of cold white outside. He knelt beside the small brick fireplace and laid in fresh logs, striking a match with unhurried precision. The flame caught quickly, blooming into a soft orange flicker before settling into a steady glow. Soon the crackle of burning wood filled the café with that comforting sound of winter warmth, quiet, familiar, and endlessly soothing. The first scent to drift into the air was cinnamon. The owner brewed a small pot of spiced tea for the early visitors he knew were coming, just as they always did when snow blanketed the town. The aroma mingled with the warmth of the fire, creating a haven of comfort that could be sensed even before setting foot inside. Finally, when everything was ready, he unlocked the door and stepped back. The bell above the entrance chimed softly as it swayed, its sound gentle enough not to disturb the peaceful hush outside. The café was open, but the morning still belonged to the quiet. Inside, there was space to sit, slow down, and simply watch the snow continue to fall. Outside the café's wide front window, the snowfall grew thicker, though never hurried. Flakes drifted downward in winding paths, sometimes catching a breeze, sometimes falling straight and lazily toward the earth. From inside, it looked like a world made of tiny drifting stars, each one glimmering before settling into the growing white. The young teacher cupped her hands around her warm mug and leaned forward, her breath fogging the glass. She traced a small semicircle in the condensation with a fingertip, creating her own window within the window, a reminder of childhood winters and days spent drawing simple shapes while the world outside changed under snow. The older man by the fire flipped his newspaper pages slowly, not so much reading the news as pretending to, letting the familiar motion fill the quiet. The crackle of pine logs added a soft, rhythmic backdrop, like gentle punctuation in the stillness. Beyond the pane of glass, the streets remained mostly empty, the few passers-by wrapped in scarves and thick coats, moving as though the snow itself encouraged calmer steps. A horse-drawn sleigh in the distance
jingled softly as it passed, the faint sound of bells absorbed into the snowy air before carrying into the café like a memory. The cafe owner paused behind the counter, taking a moment just to watch. He enjoyed these simple scenes more than the busiest days, people finding peace, the world moving slowly, the snowfall turning the everyday into something quietly magical. Inside, every sound felt softened, the whisper of steam from the kettle, the gentle clink of cup meeting saucer, the turning of a newspaper page. Outside, the snow continued its patient descent, layer upon layer, covering rooftops, fences, and sleeping gardens in its gentle, unhurried embrace. Time did not stop, but it stretched wide and calm, inviting anyone within sight of the falling flakes to simply breathe and be.
A young couple stepped out of their small brick house, bundled in thick scarves and mittens, ready for their morning walk through the sleeping town. Their boots sank gently into the fresh powder, leaving neat impressions behind them, temporary marks on a world that seemed content to erase itself again with the next passing flake. The air was crisp, but not biting. It carried the faint scent of wood smoke drifting from chimneys and the barely there sweetness of winter pine. As they walked, the snowflakes caught on their eyelashes and hats, sparkling for a moment before melting back into the quiet. The streets were still mostly untouched. Storefronts sat in peaceful slumber, signs dusted with snow, window boxes holding small mountains of white where flowers once bloomed in summer. Lanterns cast soft halos through the snowfall, bright enough to glow, yet gentle enough not to disturb the scene's serenity. The couple walked side by side without speaking. They didn't need to. Their breath puffed out in quiet clouds, drifting upward and disappearing into the air. The sound of their footsteps, the slow, steady crunch on the snow, was the only thing that hinted at movement in a town that seemed frozen in a moment of perfect calm. They passed the old fountain in the center of town, now transformed into a delicate sculpture of ice and snow. Water no longer flowed openly, but instead trickled beneath a glass-like crust, singing a faint winter melody for those who listened closely. The sound was subtle, barely audible, but it added its voice to the morning, a reminder that life continued beneath the stillness. They crossed the small stone bridge that arched over the town creek. The water below moved slowly, dulled by the cold, but not silent. Its slow gurgle blended with the hush of falling snow, creating a harmony only winter mornings could produce. Every so often, the couple paused, not because they were tired, but because the world around them deserved a moment. A bird shaking snow from its feathers, a distant window opening just a crack as someone let in fresh air, a soft wind rustling through bare branches, sending tiny cascades of snow drifting down. In this small town, there was no reason to rush. The morning belonged to quiet feet, shared breaths, and the grace of snow filling every corner with stillness. The couple continued their walk, moving through a landscape that felt like a dream gently unfolding, one soft step at a time.
The little bookshop near the center of town had opened just as the snowfall reached its thickest. Its windows were fogged at the corners, collecting tiny droplets of warmth as the cold outside met the gentle heat within. Inside, the air smelled of paper, old ink, and the comforting spice of tea steeping on a small table beside the register.
The elderly shopkeeper moved with unhurried grace, adjusting her spectacles as she stepped carefully along the narrow aisles. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath her shoes, each sound spaced apart, as though the room itself respected the quiet. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with stories from distant lands, forgotten kingdoms, and winters much like this one. A small fire crackled in a black iron stove in the corner, giving off a low, steady warmth that seeped into the shelves and bindings, keeping the chill at bay. It was a modest fire, no roaring flames, just glowing embers and occasional soft pops that almost sounded like sighs of relief from the cold outside. A young boy, wrapped in a knitted sweater 2 sizes too big, pushed open the bookshop door. The bell gave its gentle ring, barely louder than the rustle of pages. Snowflakes clung to his hair and scarf, and he quickly brushed them free before wandering toward the back of the shop where the stories lived. He moved with the reverence of someone entering a sacred space. He traced his finger along the edges of a row of books until he found one he recognized, an old winter tale he had loved for years. The shopkeeper smiled without speaking, understanding that in this quiet morning words were not necessary. She poured a small cup of tea and placed it on the counter, just waiting for the boy to join her when he was ready. Outside the frosted windows, the world remained still. A lone bird landed on the shop's window ledge, fluffy and round against the cold, peeking inside as though curious about the world of books. Snow continued to fall around it, collecting softly on its feathers before it shook itself clean and settled again. The boy finally approached the counter, his chosen book tucked under his arm. He set it down gently as though handling a treasure. The shopkeeper rang up the sale with slow, familiar motions, wrapping the book in brown paper and tying it with simple twine, a ritual as steady and comforting as the falling snow. "Thank you," the boy whispered, barely above the hush of the shop. The shopkeeper smiled, handing over the wrapped parcel. "Stay warm," she said softly, her voice as gentle as the snowfall outside. He stepped back into the snow-covered street, leaving the warm glow of the shop behind. Inside, the bell chimed once more, the stove crackled, and the pages of a nearby book rustled slightly, as though winter itself had turned a page of its own story. The postman, wrapped in a thick coat the color of pine bark, stepped out of his small post office with a leather satchel resting against his shoulder. The snow had grown deeper since dawn, but he walked with the patience of someone who had delivered letters through many winters. His pace was steady, unhurried, in harmony with the morning's gentle stillness. As he moved down the street, snowflakes gathered on his cap and the straps of his bag. The sound of his boots pressing into the snow was rhythmic and comforting, a repeated, soft crunch that echoed faintly between the silent buildings. He paused once to look up at the sky, watching the flakes drift downward in a pattern that was never chaotic,
only beautifully slow. Inside the satchel were letters and small parcels, each one carrying a message. A handwritten greeting from a daughter studying far away, an envelope sealed with wax from a friend in another town, a postcard from a traveler who had promised to send news from every place he visited. The postman knew many of the stories behind them, though he never spoke of them. His work was less about messages and more about connections, threads that kept the quiet town woven together. He stopped first at the stone house on Cherry Lane, placing 2 letters into the wooden box beside the small gate. The box creaked as it closed, the kind of familiar sound that felt like part of the town's heartbeat. He took a moment to brush the snow from the lid before moving on, ensuring that nothing, no matter how small, was forgotten beneath winter's blanket. A few houses later, he found a child waiting on the porch, hopping from one foot to the other in excitement, scarf trailing behind like a flag. The postman smiled gently as he handed over a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. The child's eyes widened with the kind of wonder only someone young and unhurried can hold. The postman nodded a silent, "You're welcome," and the child ran inside, leaving behind little footprints that the snow began to soften almost immediately. He continued his rounds past the quiet café, where he paused to warm his fingers by the glow visible through the window. He didn't go inside, just appreciated the golden light from the street, the sight of patrons sipping their tea and watching the snow fall in peaceful stillness. The warmth within reminded him that winter wasn't about cold, but the way people kept warmth alive together. As he walked on, a sleigh moved slowly down the street, its bells chiming softly. The driver raised a hand in greeting. The postman tipped his hat in return, their exchange carried out without a word. In this town, gestures were often enough. The final stop was an ivy-draped cottage at the edge of the lane. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, and a flower pot, now filled with snow instead of blooms, sat beside the door. He slipped a single letter into the box, then stood for a moment listening. Only the sound of falling flakes, the distant creak of a shifting tree branch, and the steady whisper of winter filled the quiet morning. With his satchel lighter and his heart warmed, he turned and began the slow walk back toward the post office. The snow continued to fall, soft and patient, covering his footprints a little more with each passing moment. Just as winter always does, folding the stories of the day gently into its endless, peaceful silence.
As midday passed, the town settled into an even deeper calm, the kind that arrives when everyone has found their place, inside warm rooms, beside glowing fires, or simply resting beneath blankets while the snow continued its slow descent. The sky had taken on a faint silver tone, the sun hiding somewhere behind thick clouds, content to let the snowfall become the day's main storyteller. Light filtered through the clouds gently, without harshness, illuminating the town in a glow both muted and magical. It felt as though time itself had put on a softer coat. Inside the café, the flames in the fireplace had mellowed into a bed of glowing embers. They gave off a steady gold warmth, and the gentle sound of settling logs became a companion to the soft murmur of turning pages and the faint clink of spoons against teacups. The teacher still sat by the window, her tea now half finished, her eyes drifting between the book she held and the winter landscape outside. She wasn't really reading. Instead, she let the slow fall of snowflakes become her story, one that required no words, no chapters, only the unfolding of quiet moments. The older man by the fire had nodded off in his chair, newspaper folded loosely on his lap. His breathing was gentle, perfectly matched to the rhythm of the afternoon. No one disturbed him. In this town, sleep in the presence of a warm fire was considered good company. The cafe owner watched over the room with a small smile. He wiped down the counter, refilled the kettle, and straightened the plates laid out with tiny buttered rolls. Not a single movement was hurried. He worked the way snow fell, slow, natural, inevitable. Outside, the streets had grown even more still. The couple who had taken their morning walk had returned home, shaking snow from their coats before slipping inside to the promise of hot cocoa and a resting afternoon. Their footprints in the street had already begun to soften and blur, snow reclaiming what had been briefly marked. Near the old stone bridge, the creek continued its muffled song under its winter crust. Icicles hung like delicate chandeliers from the edges of the railing, catching even the smallest hints of light and scattering it in tiny glimmers. Not a bird stirred from the trees now. They too seemed to pause for the hush of snowy afternoon. The bookshop glowed warmly through its fogged windows. Inside, the shopkeeper quietly restocked a small table near the front with winter novels and soft-bound poetry. A faint aroma of dried lavender mingled with the smell of time-worn paper and burning wood. The shop was rarely loud, but today it was quieter still, as though every story within its walls was waiting patiently for the evening. As the hours stretched on, the whole town seemed wrapped in the shared warmth of unspoken stillness. No rushing cars, no loud voices, no hurry of any kind. Only snowflakes drifting downward, soft as feathers, and the gentle exhale of a winter world moving at a soothing, dreamlike pace. Afternoon dissolved into something like a sigh, a moment suspended, soft and slow, as though the town was being rocked gently toward evening, cradled by the steady fall of snow.
As daylight thinned and drifted quietly toward evening, a soft change settled over the town, subtle, unannounced, like a page being turned without a sound. The snow still fell in patient silence, but now the world beneath it began to glow, as lamps flickered on, one by one, in windows across the peaceful streets. Warm amber rectangles of light appeared on the snow, stretching softly onto the ground like gentle invitations. The baker's shop, now closed for the day, had a single lantern glowing in the back room while its owner kneaded dough for tomorrow's loaves. The shadows on the wall moved slowly to the rhythm of her hands, a private dance of work done in calm and contentment. The bookshop's windows glimmered with the deep golden glow of evening candles.
The elderly shopkeeper had settled into her favorite high-backed chair near the stove, a knitted shawl over her lap and a novel open in her hands. The fire beside her had diminished to embers, but their light was warm and alive, adding a rich, flickering heartbeat to the quiet room. Outside the window, the snow coated the bushes in gentle mounds, as though the world had decided to soften all its edges. In a small cottage at the end of Willow Lane, the young couple who had walked through the morning snowfall now sat together near their fireplace. A pot of cocoa simmered on the stove, sending tendrils of sweet steam into the air. They spoke softly, their words slow and unhurried, but often they simply fell into comfortable silence, letting the crackle of the fire say everything for them. Now and then, the woman leaned her head on her partner's shoulder, and the world beyond their window disappeared into the dreamy snowfall. The café remained open a little while longer, its windows glowing like a tiny lighthouse in the winter evening. The teacher, no longer reading but simply resting, finished the last sip of her tea while watching the snow drift past the lamplight outside. The older man had woken from his nap with a small stretch, smiling sheepishly at the owner before gathering himself to leave. He didn't hurry, no one did, and the cafe door chimed softly as he stepped into the quiet evening. The postman, having hung up his coat and emptied his satchel for the day, sat alone at a small table in his home. A single oil lamp lit the room, casting long golden shadows that flickered in time with the slow burn of his tiny stove. He sipped warm soup and listened to the whisper of wind against the windows. The silence did not feel empty to him. It felt earned, a reward for the day's gentle steps through snow-covered streets. Outside, the town clock chimed 7, its voice softened by the winter air. Each mellow tone floated across the rooftops and drifted down into the snowy lanes, a reminder that evening had fully settled in. Yet even the passing of time felt unhurried, the chimes spaced like calm breaths in the stillness. Along the stone bridge, icicles shimmered faintly in the soft lamplight, and the creek murmured beneath its crust of ice, the subtle sound blending into the hush of falling snow. The occasional flicker of a horse-drawn sleigh lantern moved slowly along distant paths, disappearing into the gentle blue of dusk. With every light that appeared in every window, the town felt warmer. Not because the cold relented, but because the people within shared the simple gift of presence, of stillness, of choosing to end the day in quiet comfort. Evening in this snow-covered town was not the end of waking hours, but a soft descent into the embrace of winter night, where everything moved slowly, everything glowed gently, and the world seemed to breathe in time with the falling snow.
Night arrived, not with fanfare, but with the quiet confidence of a soft blanket being laid gently across a sleeping child. The sky deepened into a muted indigo, and the snow continued its steady descent, lighter now, as though the clouds themselves were growing drowsy. The town rested fully beneath winter's hush. Rooftops were rounded under smooth layers of white. Fences softened into gentle shapes, and even the street signs looked calmer under their snowy caps. The world had edges no longer, only curves, softness, and stillness. Inside the cafe, the owner finished wiping down the last table. He dimmed the lights, leaving only the glow of the fireplace to flicker quietly across the walls. The final embers crackled softly, sending tiny sparks of orange light dancing before fading into deep warmth. He stood for a moment, hands in his pockets, simply listening to the peaceful hush of his small sanctuary before blowing out the candle on the counter and stepping outside. The bell above the door gave a final, sleepy chime before settling into silence.
Down the lane, the bookshop had gone dark, except for one small lamp near the stove. The elderly shopkeeper had blown out her candles and climbed the narrow stairs to her bedroom. The last sound downstairs was the soft rustle of pages settling as the shop returned to perfect stillness. Outside the window, the snow reflected the faint glow of the lamp, making it seem as though the stories within the shop were keeping quiet watch over the night. At the cottage on Willow Lane, the young couple had finished their cocoa and curled under a thick wool blanket in front of the dying fire. The flames glowed low, casting shadows that swayed gently across the wooden floor. Their breathing slowed, matching the sleepy rhythm of winter. From time to time, a log shifted in the fireplace, but even this sound felt like part of a lullaby, soft, natural, and reassuring. The postman, long since finished with his supper, sat in his rocking chair near his stove, listening to the faint whistle of wind beyond the glass. His eyelids grew heavy, and his head tipped forward briefly before he let himself give in to sleep. The rocking chair creaked once, then fell still, joining the entire town in its evening rest. Outside, the creek beneath the stone bridge whispered faintly, its voice softened by ice and snow. Icicles gleamed with moonlight, tiny crystals catching whatever light the night offered, as though holding small stars inside them. A fox padded silently across the bridge, leaving delicate tracks that the snow began to soften almost immediately. Farther up the hill, the old town clock chimed once more, its tone slow and mellow, as if it too had grown sleepy. The bell's echoes drifted outward, wrapping around the rooftops in gentle waves before dissolving into the snowy stillness. Not a single window remained unlit without purpose. Each glowing square of golden light signaled a story unfolding behind curtains. A mother tucking in a child, someone writing a letter by lamp, a cat curled atop a warm quilt, someone simply watching the snowfall and letting their heart settle into its pace. Above it all, the snowfall became finer and finer until flakes drifted like powdered stars across the sky. The world exhaled, the night deepened, the snow continued, slow and perfect, as though the heavens themselves had closed their eyes. The small town slept, peaceful, protected, embraced by winter's arms. And for anyone awake enough to listen, the silence had its own gentle voice. Rest now. The world is quiet. The snow will keep watch.